Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the third episode of Dissensus, the show where we don't have to agree, and we don't have to agree to disagree. We can just talk about stuff, and any centrally organizing conceptual thematic core is something that's do-it-yourself. You are going to have to infer it. If you can guess, I'm not going to offer you a prize because somebody will find that legally binding. Anyway, welcome back. So for this third episode, I'm continuing my conversation with the always delightful Christine Brophy, who was in episodes 1 and 2. And we're going to pick it up from here. And for those of you who are familiar with my work, you know that I do not always find it easy or comfortable to be bound by the strictures of Babylonian time, all of its 12s and 60s, circles clinging in, and so sometimes I run over, and that's how you get a 4.5-hour alchemy video. But we're going to try to make these episodes a little bit more, how did you put it, Christine?
Bound? Bound by something greater than ourselves.
Bound by something greater than ourselves, and hopefully not great and mighty forms that do not live. So in the interest of that, I busted out my lecture timer. Whoop, here we go, and we are go. Okay. Hello, Christine. Welcome back.
Hi. I'm excited to be here, excited to see where this goes.
Me too. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where did we want to pick up for today?
So I wanted to talk a lot about spark in particular, which is kind of like that initial sort of crossing the threshold into adventure, and to talk a little bit about, we were talking behind the scenes about the importance of story and storytelling, and specifically as that centers around the Sandman, just because that opening scene I found like quite captivating, how he talks about dream being sort of an entryway into a world of adventure, and like
is this in the Netflix series?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I haven't seen it. I'm
slated.
I know. No, it's fine. So no spoilers. No, look,
I didn't say anything.
I haven't seen it. I'm due to watch the first maybe episode or two tonight. But of course, I've read the comic series a number of times, so I suspect that there's a fair bit of commonality there. It's not like I'm going to be in the dark.
Yeah, no, totally.
I'm not thinking here of the classic 1950s song. Although I do hope that someone this year, Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. It's so terrifying. Just shifted into minor key, and it's like, oh, it's deeply creepy. Everything in minor key is. But anyway, okay. So the first episode of Sandman, I interrupted you. That was rude.
No worries. That's good to know that you haven't seen it yet. So I won't. And also, in the interest of our audience, perhaps who also haven't seen it, to like be careful as we're treading these waters. But
spoilers.
But yeah, I guess I wanted to. The whole reason for this sort of like track of thinking, and I wanted to kind of start with a personal story of kind of, I guess you might even say that it's like how Anderson and I like came to like start doing these like types of conversations, and even like talking around this like topic of ideas. But also the reason why I kind of wanted to root this in a personal story is just because this whole idea of like finding spark and then, sort of following that path that spark leads you, and like what that whole purpose is. And, we can talk a little bit about the purpose of spark and finding it, that it's a process. It's not like there's a single tool that you can use, or a single piece of advice that you'll follow that will apply perpetually for you to be able to, continue to follow that path. It's like a series of encounters and things, and it's just like that bounces you around, and you sort of like start to be able to identify it and follow it. And it's a process. Although
it remains maddeningly elusive,
exactly,
and mercurial. And as soon as you're like, okay, I finally got it, I've got the formula. That formula doesn't work. It's like you constantly have to come up with a new formula. It's sort of related to the old formula, and you zone in on it. I know what you mean.
That's exactly it. And like, I just want to say that, so there's this book. This is going to go a little bit off topic. We'll come back and I'll tell a story.
No, there's no such thing as off topic. It's merely, it's digressive circumambulation.
Yeah. There you go. Circumambulation. I like it. So there's this book that that I read a while back and that I'm having to reread right now that's related to basketball, and it's by Dick DiVenzio, and it's called Stuff Good Players Should Know.
Mhm.
And he took a different angle on kind of coaching basketball, and as opposed to teaching sort of plays or like terminology that's like, setting different types of screens and like this type of stuff. He thinks about things more as like he's watched players play for many years. He sees the ways that the game flows and how people get stuck. And then he provides little like thinking tools or mechanisms or like little tiny rules that help you get unstuck in specific situations. So it's like, and it's this really fun book that's just like this kind of like dictionary from like A to Z of these little types of things that you can think about that sort of make you focus on smaller habits so that you can then get yourself unstuck in different situations and sort of change your circumstances.
So are they like frame breakers or like heuristics? Like I'm thinking here of do you know Brian Eno's what's the name of that? Brian Eno has this classic set of prompts. He used to sell cards. I think there's an online website. Anyway, it's like a set of creative process prompts that creative people, and I guess since Brian Eno is a music producer, right? Music, you like use them to trig you. It's a little bit like, the book by George Polya, How to Solve It, about math.
No.
It's a fascinating book. It's really interesting. I recommend it to my students quite a lot. So it's a mathematics book, and basically it's full of all sorts of different ways to think about a problem to try to untangle it. So it's partly frame breaking and partly sort of frame shifting, right? Like, what if you consider the problem in this way, or, so some of these are pretty elementary, literally, I guess, so like analysis, break it down into smaller parts, right? Or try to step back or transpose the problem into sort of a different mode or key or whatever, right? And they're somewhat specific to mathematics and formal systems, but provided you can transpose them into a different key, they're actually a pretty highly generalizable set of problem solving techniques. So anyway, I think about these two things. So is the book like that? Is it sort of like prompts, or is it, can you give me an example maybe?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of interesting, the way of thinking about it. So I guess like when you're approaching a math problem, you're kind of like looking down at a piece of paper, sort of like, this is the way how I would see it, or like your bird's eye view sort of. So then you need to kind of like look at it from different angles. Whereas the way how you sort of break frame in basketball is by trying on different mental approaches, or like, you've got like a specific, like, I mean, so there's like those positive thinking sort of like approaches let me see, like,
I should refresh our viewers that Christine is like semi-pro in the basketball set. I think that's fair, right?
I had a long basketball history, and then I had a series of injuries, and now I've just kind of like re-entered the world of basketball as like a coach, even though I was a coach before, but now it's like just purely as a coach. But you're like a coach and also like a meta coach. You're doing some higher level of abstraction thing also, right? Anyway, we'll get to that. But basketball, please go on. So an example, I guess, would be like, this is a simple word. Now, I don't know if this is actually in the book, but it's just the one that's coming to mind right now. Because sometimes I'm terrible at remembering things when I'm being put on the spot. Just the idea of like using the words like yet. So like, I'm not good at this yet. And that if you kind of enter in with that approach, as opposed to just saying like drat, like you're comparing yourself to somebody else and you see if they're a good shooter, and it's like, well, I'm never going to be a good shooter. They're inherently gifted by this. And it's just like, no, I'm not good at this yet. And using the word yet will kind of like change your frame.
Right.
But
to sort of uncork the proposition or something, like uncork it at the end, uncork the time end. It's early.
There you go.
Uncork the time ends. Sure. Anyway, but you know what I mean, right? The yet takes what is a contained fact and kind of pops it into a future line. Does that actually make sense? I think it does. Anyway.
I think it does.
I think it does. Well, no one knows. Okay, so yet, that's an interesting example.
Or expect to do more than your share or something like that, so that you're entering into a thing, into the gym where it's not just like, I'm here as a basketball player, but it's like you're looking at the end of the game for like, if there's water bottles that are left around, that you're going to throw them away in the garbage can. But then by doing those little things that are like, seem to be irrelevant to the basketball game, suddenly your perspective on the court has changed. Like you've opened up your view to looking just beyond your own kind of insecurities, and that you're suddenly looking at the movement of other players and like their patterns of action and things like that. So it's like, it's a whole bunch of little things that are like basic fundamental habits that you can do. And there's also some like court specific ones that are just like, just like ways of playing defense and stuff like that kind of are against the norm of the way how they teach you how to play defense, like how to close out and stuff like that, which I'm going to ignore for now because it's not.
But that actually, so it does, like, it doesn't have a set of I don't know, whatever universal conditions that are an ideal. It has a bunch of things that are contextually potentially useful. So it really does have heuristics in it. Try this or try this, where the two things might be in some sense mutually exclusive. Like you might be shifting into a different defense mode or way of thinking as opposed to, right? Okay.
Maybe this is it. Maybe that's such a good way of putting it. So it's like, so if you give a person a whole bunch of different heuristics, some of which are going to be conflicting, that you get a person to kind of like try these different things on, and then for them in their own life, they'll see which ones kind of break them out of misery or like, that like help them to sort of take their game to a new level, to increase the joy and life in their life. That type of thing. So
to knock them into flow.
Yeah, to knock them into flow, but like to help, like if you've like, you have to like give them all these different heuristics so people can kind of bounce around, and then they'll hit one that's like, ooh, there's a spark.
Right.
Spark. And then you kind of like gets you sort of moving on the process of the journey, as opposed to trying to think it through in advance about the right way to go about things or something like that.
Right. I imagine I'm sure you've already thought of this. But of course that's very in keeping with both of our general projects and our collective project. The shorthand that I have sometimes leaned on, I haven't yet decided whether or not it's like a phrase, but the shorthand that I often lean on in this respect is, I think the best way to go about being a cognitive agent in the broadest sense, right, moving through life, is fill your mind with tools. Fill your mind with tools and don't get too hung up on any one tool. Right. So this is like escaping the, give a man a hammer and he treats everything like a nail, which I think we talked about a while ago. And I was saying, if you don't have a hammer, you can use a soup can. I've done it. Soup can's a surprisingly versatile object, but it's not as good as a hammer. And it's incredibly difficult off the bat to use a soup can to like screw in a Phillips screw. I guess you could do it off the bat.
I love that you say it off the bat, but there's a way.
if you took two cans or took a can and a sharp concrete edge, you could rupture the can. You could then bend it open with your hands, twist it, right? And if you twisted it in the right way, you could probably get a decent little like, LV of enough that, maybe you might have to fold it over. Anyway, I'll have to try this, but when we get some free time. My partner is going to love this. Why is there soup everywhere? I'm trying to screw a screw in.
Why?
Yeah,
because
this is the comparable thing. You got a bottle of corked wine. You can't find your corkscrew anywhere. If you've got a hair elastic and a wood screw, that will work if the wood screw is long enough. The hair elastic is for grip. Regular elastic works too if you like broccoli. Anyway,
I thought that it was just to put your long locks up in a ponytail so you could focus on the work.
Thankfully, I no longer have such long locks. And I'm not looking back. It was so much work. Long hair. Anyway, that's decades ago. Okay, so the general idea, right? Fill your mind with tools, and as per like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Right, the no free lunch hypothesis and Tanstaffel. For any given heuristic, there is an equal number of conditions in which it is a positive and beneficial heuristic, and in which it is a negative interference bias, right? There's like a perfect S-curve in its utility, which means that no one heuristic is good for all the things. given, right? And I think that it generalizes out to all sorts of sort of modes, what I think of as sliders, right, on the mixing board of thought or being. So you just want to have a whole bunch of them. It's all about phase, function, fit, using the right heuristic at the right time to knock yourself out of this or that. And I like this idea of the stuckness. I think I might pick this book up. It's been a long time since I basketed a ball, but maybe I'll grab it. I've been reading about baseball, the book you were just talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's like, it makes you, I like the way how it broke apart my thinking, because I've been spending so much time reading at the level of like mythology and like symbolism. Mm-hmm. And as I'm going into implementing one of the games that I built and like working with real people, I can't just be talking in mythical terms, because it's like, okay, this is not relevant to me. So in this backwards way, this book has reminded me of like, oh yeah, this is the level that you need to be engaging with. And so it's like trying to pull my brain in the opposite direction, which has been really useful in a surprising way. Right. But the reason why all of this stuff and like why I wanted to start with like the personal story and then go from there is because something that I think that Anderson's really strong at is breaking apart being able to hold multiple voices at once and play them out. And I think that like this might be a spot where, as we're walking through the process of sort of like finding spark and like where that leads, that like being able to give a whole bunch of different heuristics or all the different perspectives at each point in time. So it's like you can come here and like maybe one of them will bounce you in the direction that you kind of needed to hear in order to find spark again. So that's kind of my hope.
I love that. That's great. Okay, so good. We set an intention.
We set an intention.
Let's see if we can provide a host of different perspectives, voices, tools, heuristics, etc. In both the abstract, mythological, and nuts and bolts level to help you dislodge your stuckness so that you too can get back in flow and head towards spark.
Yeah, and we're gonna try and focus on spark so that we can, give enough detail to it, and then hopefully maintain our attention across episodes.
Okay, fantastic.
So that we can follow this to its logical conclusion.
Good. Okay, so spark will be our lighthouse, but not like the terrible, creepy lighthouses that you always seem to see. A good one.
A good one.
A good one.
Okay.
Yeah, a good navigation beacon. Okay, that sounds good. So I like this framing.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so I guess I'll start with just telling the story, I guess, of how Anderson and I sort of started working in this domain, at least like where our sort of narratives overlapped. I had so when this is going to be, it's going to be a tough story to tell, but I want to tell it. So when Jordan rose to fame, or for some people, they'll say infamy, I don't know, it was like 5 years back. By
which you mean Dr. Jordan B. Peterson?
Yes. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. As it would with anybody, it's kind of like getting the sense of like winning the lottery all of a sudden, but it had ripples in his network, I know, all around, which was painful for him as well as for everybody surrounding him. And that's just part of life when somebody's kind of entering a higher level of consciousness, that like everybody else also is entering a higher level of consciousness, and we have to kind of like sort of iron out the kinks that we didn't know existed. But around that same time, my dad was also diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I was like kind of grappling with my PhD in general, of whether or not I wanted to continue on that path or not, if academia was really for me. So I made the decision to leave academia. But during that time, I was working on a business with Jordan And that was the thing that was related to the teenage goal setting program.
Mhm.
And I was struggling to
Wait, which came out in part out of the self-authoring material,
yeah,
or yeah.
It was it was inspired by my own work that I had done on self-authoring, that it had helped me through a transition period out of high school into university. And because of the personal impact that it had, I wanted to see if I could bring that to people who were already like in grade 11, like change it into a form that would be engaging for somebody in grade 11, so that I could potentially iron out the big swoop that I took and like make it a little bit more even keeled for others. Yeah. So I was working on that. And at the same time, I knew that I should take time off, and that to take time off with my dad to help care for him, because my family is small and there weren't a lot of people there, and in general, just to be there with him during the last years. But that was it was a hard time. And it became a hyper focus. Well, oh man, this is going to be, it's going to be hard to explain. I'm going to need your help, Anderson, to pull this out. Yeah. Okay. So it was you might need to edit this.
No editing.
No editing. All right.
It's okay. Just take time. Hey, look, this is a great big thing. If you had it compressed down into a set of pithy aphorisms, you probably would have shaved most of the complexity off. So it's okay. Just go ahead. Hit the feeling.
Yeah. So this is like, it's the first time through this story, which I know is an important story to tell, but I've never really told it before.
Yeah.
But I would like to. So during that time, I struggled because I didn't, I knew that I had taken time off for my dad for a reason, but I was constantly criticizing myself for the time that I was spending with him, thinking that I was not being productive, that I was actually using his death as an excuse for laziness. And that like, really, this is just an excuse for not having figured out my life. And so I was constantly throwing myself back and forth between this project, the goal setting program, which like was something that I started to work on like purely in isolation, just because of the nature of the circumstances, where Jordan's attention was like drawn elsewhere. And like in an understandable way. But it was without sort of like a sounding board. There's something that I read recently that was in a book, and it was saying that the process of individuation or becoming an individual requires a social context for it to happen in. Otherwise, you kind of go mad. And that's like, I was starting to go mad, just because like you don't have anything outside of yourself to be throwing these ideas out at, so you just kind of get stuck in a certain level of understanding. So I was writing myself in circles, basically, so I knew that something was wrong with the program. I knew that this was like, but I didn't know what. It turned out that like it's just doing goal setting or whatever with teenagers is not it's not only not engaging or entertaining. So therefore, because of their level of understanding of their lives and the kind of risk that is involved, where it's like they're kind of in a safer spot, where for most high school students in North America that are considering university or things like that, they've got a bit of a safety net around them, and it's not. They're not thinking about the risks, and their social circle is purely within their high school and that. So they're not thinking about like a greater context and trying to embed themselves within a greater context. Their meaningful context is just like their immediate sort of like cliques in that. And they have this kind of impending sense of doom that there might be something bigger, but they think that they've got it figured out with university, because that's sort of the path forward that parents and everybody else has said is like good. So they figure, okay, I've got my future sort of figured out. So we'll
stick a pin in that. About later, as you know, I have strong feelings about that area, despite the fact I teach at a university. Anyway,
So
So
Yes.
kind of an impossible trilemma, it seems like, but I mean, an impossible trilemma insofar as it's like whatever part of you was hammering on you with the why are you being lazy and slothful, right?
Yeah.
Shrug off your apathy, which it was doing because you were paying attention to like your, you know, your human experience and
Yeah.
connections, right? So that's pulling in two directions. There's, right, you know, being really there and present and supporting, and then there's you need to figure your shit out, right?
Yeah.
You should be striving, reaching for that brass ring. That piece is
Mm-hmm.
ambition, which is telling
Yeah.
you you're not pushing hard enough. And then there's this third piece, in a sense, that is the program separate from your PhD per se, right? The research part, which feels stuck to you, dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was something that was missing from it that I didn't really understand at that time. Like
Right.
I knew that I had gone through a bunch of personal experiences through my research, working with people and not seeing that spark with them, through my own personal experience of life, that like that the parts that actually worked for me, that helped me through the transition, was not just purely setting goals for myself. And that in fact, often the pure just setting of goals without this other sort of like out living in life, trying things on piece, was just like, that would continually lead to just like the pure ambition, that would not actually map onto reality. And like, or the pure dream that was not, grounded in the human, like the person that I was. So I had this sense that like just doing goal setting with teenagers was not the way to go, that there was something dead about this project, but I didn't know what, because I also wasn't relying on my own sort of sense of, or trusting in my own kind of humanity.
I know we've talked a bit before. I don't know if we've recorded, but I know we've talked a bit before about, I find that you know, this plugs into your work, obviously. But I find the sort of system that currently exists around goal and career setting, with young people, ridiculous, right? So it's like, okay, so let's say that you want to do a particular career. That means you have to get into a particular graduate program, which means you have to get into a particular undergrad program, which means that you have to go to a particular specialist high school with particular courses and grades, which means that you have to go to a particular middle school that has that focus, which means we're asking people in like grade 5 to decide their career.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. I mean, they don't have the experience, and they're not sort of embedded in broader social context, right? Their frontal lobes aren't even close to having gelled. So their sense of risk and projection and stuff are wacky, right? And frankly, a lot of the time, you know, at that age, we haven't sorted out the difference between our own goals and imposed ambitions or echoed ambitions, right? Like a lot of the time we're echoing parental ambitions, or we're echoing social ambitions, right? And of course people get those things and then go, I am not satisfied. Why? You know, but this idea that we're asking,
I want to go back to that. That's something that is really key. This
idea of asking 12-year-olds is just like, I find it, when I was 12, I wanted to be, I think, maybe a detective. I don't know, or a capital S scientist, like the kind you get in comic books. Like, you know.
No, I totally agree.
And now I am a detective scientist. Everything worked out. In fact, I never did get my PI license, but I think about it every couple of years. It's not that hard to do, and I feel like it's a good rounding out of the Batman portfolio. But anyway, please continue.
I think that we've mentioned this in a past episode, but it was just my I ran across that stat that like right now there's a lot of need for there's a high demand for the jobs that were initially held by teenagers in summers. And now we're at the end of the summer, so it's not the case. But throughout this summer they had difficulty hiring teenagers.
Really?
And like partly they said that it was because of COVID, where people started to like value or they weren't putting as much of an emphasis on work, and they were putting more of an emphasis on like personal growth, I guess, or like just kind of themselves. But there was this other piece, which was like a longer sort of arching curve, that teenagers are just too busy doing volunteer hours and athletics and to get them into university. And again, it's this kind of like, but then you also see the anxiety rates going up in teenagers. So it's just like that there's these goals that are being set, and then we're working backwards from them, and we've forgotten the piece of it, which is like, oh yeah, you got to go out and live a little bit to kind of learn about yourself. And then you set some goals, and then you go out and live, and then you assess and set some goals, and like, but you build out from there. And it's not like let's work backwards immediately from 10 years in the future. And your day today we've got it figured out for you.
And yet you'll get this weird concerned silence from your guidance counselor a lot of the time if they say, so what are you thinking of doing after grade 12? Or back, I grew up with OAC, semi grade 13, and you say, I think I'm gonna live life. they really they look concerned. They send a letter home. But it does seem like a good place to start. I don't know. Anyway.
I know. Yeah. It's something that I've often, like, I mean, like, cause like on the one hand, you don't just want, you don't just, this is actually something interesting that I've found from talking about the program or the game that I'm building right now with teenagers, is that when I was trying to find the phrasing to use to capture their attention, to like draw them outside of themselves and to get like for them to generate ideas of what adventures that they would go on or deals that they would make for each week, a thing that they would accomplish in like a playful domain that is that draws them outside of themselves. So if you just kind of talk to them and like describe, this might be bad for your viewers because the way how I'm describing this is not going to make it relevant to them.
The viewers are a sophisticated group that they're used to forging their own meaning.
Okay, they'll try and figure this out. Yeah. We'll end up describing the game later.
I have to assume that anybody who's watching anything on my channel is used to me handing over like basically a Lego set, and right, and
it's like
they're going, there's no instruction sheet, and I'm like, right, but here's the pieces. You know?
Stay tuned, and eventually we might tell you the full story.
Try to make something useful out of it. Anyway, but so I think you're not going to have a problem with do-it-yourself meaning making or.
Well, then I would just like to say, viewers, I love you. You guys are great.
And I will echo this, and I believe I'm contractually obliged to also say, click on the subscribe link, and also put this on your Vine videos, put it on your Instagram pages. Yeah. Put it on your TikTok. Do a dance. Okay. Anyway, sorry.
No, not at all.
Okay. So I'm zooming in here for a second. So we have this moment. There's the moment where the Jordan launch occurs, and the flight crew who surrounded this rocket on the pad, some of them are recovering from the propellant burns of the orbital ascent, and so now you're in this kind of three-way thing, and you're drilling in on this goal setting, but you're finding that goal setting qua goal setting, or maybe goal setting a la carte, is not connecting. That for a variety of reasons, right? And some of that is like the classic thing at that age, which is like, okay, what do you think you'd like to do with your life? And it's like, I don't know. I don't. I'll help people. Money. That's important, right? That's
money. Important. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But not too much.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, as per winning the lottery, I wouldn't wish winning the lottery in a big way on very many people. Winning the lottery is catastrophic for people's sense of happiness and well-being. Anyway, fun fact. So what's the takeaway? Humans don't know what's good for them. Okay, so goal setting.
So we'll go back to that. Yeah. Okay. So and then I was also incredibly sick during this time, and just so it was like death. It was just in every aspect of my life, there was death. And like the creative aspect, in the literal familial aspect, and then in my own personal life was just like, life draining. So
can I ask, low energy death or high energy death? What I mean is, or maybe it could be oscillating. Did it feel like a dull and empty and bored space in which things did not hold your interest and you couldn't really tell which way to go. And occasionally you would sort of analytically construct a way to go, but then not care enough or not really see where it was pointing, or more of like an energetic disassembly, right? Oh God, it's coming to pieces, which can be sort of terrifying, especially if you've not played that game before.
Yeah. There was an impending doom that was like a sense of, I knew, there was a great amount of fear of like just these monsters that had sort of come up of, we were going through like a business negotiation. So there was like fear of like debt and other types of stuff. And in order for me to take the position that was being like honest and truthful to myself and to all the work that I had put in, that meant like a potential, taking a risky stance that could lead to a lot of financial burden for my husband and I.
Right.
So there was that. But internally, in terms of like a mental state as well, I was searching for meaning. I was searching for interest in a way that was that anytime I would look in any book, all I would see was judgment, where it was, the words that they were speaking in the book was not actually like, I couldn't understand what the person's position was. All I could read into it was, this is an instance of why I'm wrong. This is an instance of why I'm right. This is an instance of why that person's wrong. This is an instance of why that person's right. Just like trying to, it was just judgment in anything that like, so I would be like, but that was like that was me trying to find a spark and trying to find things that I was interested in.
So everything getting kind of cut up by the binary knife, it's all either confirmatory or debunking or something, right? It's like, this is an attack, this is a support, and that's it. Those are the two things. That sounds unpleasant.
And and then it was then I also remember having a conversation with my mother being like, oh wow, I just realized like I don't dream any, like I don't have like an imaginary space anymore. Like I don't I don't like, just kind of go off into daydream anymore. So there was that piece. And I also didn't really know the things that I was like trying to read.
This is making my heart ache. Like, that space, as you know, is very dear to me. So anytime, as a very brief interjection, I was once talking to a friend's, I think then fiance, but now wife. And this is before she quit her job to become a full-time writer and mother. Great decision. She's a terrific writer. And so anyway, but in this period, she was still working an office job. And so I'm talking to her, I was like, what's your job like? And she's like, oh, it's a cubicle and I'm there and I'm in the cubicle all day inside the office and but there's a, at least there's a window there. And I say, oh, that's nice anyway, right? We're making chit chat. I think it might be maybe the second time we met or the first.
Yeah.
She says, this is when I was still, what's the term? I've lost it. The Yiddish term, my brain is saying Der Flieger, the airman, but that's not right. What I mean is one who seems to subsist on air, Luftmensch. This is when I was still in my Luftmensch phase. So I didn't like live anywhere or work in any conventional sense. Anyway, so I'm talking to her and
which has some fascinating stories.
Interesting period, and I suspect we'll thread back through. So so this is during my Luftmensch period. So she's saying, I work in this office and at least have a window. And I say, well, that's nice. Like at least, you have a window. So every once in a while you can take a break from your work and look up and like look at clouds, the sky. And she says, well, actually the window is behind me, but sometimes I can feel the sun on my back.
That is so
bleak.
The image of that, but the image of that is like exactly like that's right? Exactly it.
It's the corporate culture version hell of Plato's cave or something. So it's like I'm fairly certain there's a sun by temperature-based inference.
Yeah. I see some shadows.
But all I can see is spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I said to her, I couldn't help myself. I was just like, oh my God, that's so sad. And I don't think she hadn't conveyed it in that sense, and she kind of blanked. Anyway, shortly thereafter, she quit and became an author. So good for her. But
I think that there was times. So Anderson's also done, for your audience to know, Anderson's also done this for me a few times, where he's like kind of put a label on. He's given me the emotional label of what I was feeling during that time. You'll say something like, it's like, oh my God, like that's sad, or like something like that. And it's like, oh my God, it is sad.
It is sad. Yeah. It's sort of sad and bleak. Anyhow.
Yeah.
So so
the reason why, though, again, like just looping back, the reason why like I want to like flesh out some of those like little voices or those things is because I'm hoping like if somebody else is in that space, it's like, this is what it sounds like in your head. Right. This is what it feels like. And like, this is what you can do about it.
That's exactly it. This is I'll just say, this is not just naming emotion language, but one of the great virtues of metaphor. And I was thinking about this, of course, any really good film review or book review or something is like a heap, especially if it's scathing, which is a certain kind of guilty pleasure, right? It's like a heap of absolutely like razor sharp metaphors. So I heard one recently, not to get political, but I heard one recently about Jared Kushner's new book. Okay. So Jared Kushner, formerly of the Trump dynasty.
He wrote a book?
Or maybe the once and future Trump dynasty. Anyway, he recently released a book. I don't know if he wrote it himself. He's rich, but he wrote a book. Anyway, I believe the reviewer at the New York Times said a lot of things about it that were not laudatory. But one thing that he said was that Jared Kushner's attitude towards Donald Trump, right, his unfailingly fawning attitude towards Donald Trump was, quote, like watching a cat lick the eye goo of a dog. Oh, but it's so good, right? It's gross. But boy,
oh my gosh,
it's
description.
Right?
Just tells you.
Yeah. When we expand a bit more on metaphor and sort of analogical reasoning and stuff, we talk on some of that, because I know we're gonna. But that one was just like, oh, beautiful. Right? The roles, the core physiological nastiness. And at some point, I'll tell you about this technique that I've been using with clients that involves, I can just tell you briefly. Grounding techniques for dissociation. Now I'm going off. Grounding techniques for dissociation.
This is great. If it's technique, I want to hear about it.
Okay, so when people are experiencing some degree of dissociation, they're blanking out, they're tuning out, they're derealizing or depersonalizing, right? Yeah. When they're experiencing some measure of dissociation. And for the viewers at home, dissociation. There's no A. It's not disassociation. You'll hear that a lot, but it's just dissociation. By now, it's probably been grandfathered into the Oxford English Dictionary. And I don't want to say that I'm like primarily a prescriptivist. I can deal with descriptivist English. I'm okay with the fact double made it into the OED. I'm a little less comfortable with a few of the other editions, like irregardless is now in the OED. But anyway, dissociation. So if people are experiencing a bit of dissociation, the classic thing to do is grounding technique. So one of them is like a modification of like I Spy. So, you say, can you name 4 objects in the room that are red? Right. So, and then people start looking around and they're like, oh, that little gift box, that red dragon, that terrible face, and oh gosh, the mason jar with the flash symbol on it, which things like, right? 4 things that are red. And you can kind of see what's happening there. I have to zoom in on a certain kind of featural particularity. So I'm moving from some fuzzy gestalt. I have to zoom in on specifics, right? In order and pick things out. So that's a classic. Another one is smells, because of course the sort of Proustian smell access in terms of grounding. Another is textures. You get people to touch stuff, right? So there's a bunch of these different ways. One of the best ones that I heard was you take an orange, stick it in the freezer, and freeze it solid, like with the peel on and everything. And then when you feel dissociated, you can ground out by handling the orange, which has an interesting texture, an interesting temperature, a hardness, but also an odor, right? And so it's an interesting and unusual object that pulls your attention back into space. But one of the ones I was recently...
present. That's really good.
into the now, grounding you back into the sensory and reconnecting you with your body.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that I've got my clients to do imaginally recently that seems to be quite effective, which I kind of just came up with, was look around the room, and rather than just doing the colors, because after a while that gets repetitious, right?
Yeah.
I say, I want you to look around the room and name 5 things that would be slightly unpleasant to lick. And I don't know what it is about this specifically.
I love it. Yeah, that's hilarious.
It was an intuitive move, but I was like, there's something about like you're channeling a very visceral, physical borderline between the physical and the emotional in disgust. Right?
But
that
also
disgust.
interesting. It's interesting. There's something about it that's interesting. That's not just like identification. It's you're asking them for something personal. Like you're asking them to kind of project themselves into their environment a little bit, as opposed to just it's not just like that's red. It's like, what would I find disgusting to lick? So you're pulling them outside of themselves.
That's right. But also it just fascinates me the detail with which we can imagine the unpleasantness of licking particular things that we have never licked.
Yeah.
And it's not like a horrible unpleasantness. It's just like anyway. So this is obviously an aside, but be that as it may.
That is so interesting. I know that I do something that's like in every morning, like when I take my dog for a walk, I'm conscious to like smile at the people that I pass by and like to say hello or good morning. And it started off as just like a tactic to kind of like get out of my head. And like, if I had like a bad sleep that night or something, just to kind of like ground me in the present. But then you start noticing like the reactions that you'll get from other people who will kind of be like grumpy during the day. And then like you smile at them and you say hello and their face just like lights up and they're like, hi. And it's like, oh,
right.
Oh my goodness, this just transformed the world. Like these mornings are great now.
Actual connection instead of an abstract field of hostility and distrust. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So anyway.
Okay, so wait, sorry, backtracking. Imagining things to lick, dissociative grounding, the OBD, licking a dog's eye, metaphor, the aptness of metaphor, that's sad, sun on your back, being stuck in a space where you no longer had access to your let's call it not just imaginal but imaginary, your dreamy space.
The daydreamy space that's like connected to the part of me that's like human. And like I remember also specifically I was like hung up on this idea of becoming a writer, and that I would sit down every single day to write like Stephen King, and then I would write, and then I would write in circles, and I could not like, and then I wouldn't like, it wasn't productive writing, it was just like writing in circles, and then I would get really angry at myself and like get even like more focused on you're gonna write harder this time. So this was like the headspace that I was in, and very intolerant of imperfection, although like I had no idea what perfect was. I just had a sense that like I wasn't achieving
nothing
what
was good enough.
Or like even like trying to play golf during that time, I would go to the driving range, and like if like there was a hypothetical great shot that I was aiming at, or like the best shot that I hit, and then anything, if I could not consistently hit that shot, I needed to stay at the driving range, and I couldn't like go play a game of golf. I was not prepared. So
see, I applaud you for your drive and focus and motivation, which you do have a rare degree of. Right? You have an extremely powerful focus and ambition and like lots of power behind it. But boy, it really sounds like it backed you into a not fun corner.
Yeah, this is like when you're just leaning into that side of yourself. You can get in like a really dark place, especially when there's a lot of change that's happening around you. Just pure will. You can't just will yourself through changing circumstances. Like it's not going to work. Right. So finally started to like pick apart the pieces of all that stuff, to let go of things, there was the risk that was taken in the business domain, which was like standing my ground more, and then allowing that to kind of run its course to its logical conclusion. In terms
of sort of like setting a boundary and then letting the financial chips and outcomes fall where they would, or you mean in terms of sort of challenging existing lines of, I don't know, assumed authority, or sorry, that's maybe too much detail.
Yeah,
even though it was extremely abstract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was more, I think that sometimes when people enter into relationships and projects together, when it's just two people and it's two people that are doing something that they've never done before, that there's a whole bunch of like things that are said between people and stuff and like experiences that then happen that if there's a sudden shift in context and that puts strain on the relationship, where you're suddenly like trying to figure out, wait a second, which of the things that were said, like, and then you're trying to map that out, but it's all based on hundreds of interactions that you've like thousands of interactions that you've had with each other. And if you don't trust in your own experience and like the things that were relevant to you, with equal amount of trust that you have and loyalty to the other person, then you'll end up with like an imbalanced narrative. And you need to understand that it's a creative process when you're coming into these kind of negotiations and business deals where you're each pulling forward things that were relevant to you in your interactions with each other. And then from that is created this business deal. And it's not just like, it's not a pure business analysis that happens where somebody comes in and evaluates the product and this value, and then we've got this percentage and it's like this higher order authority that generates these things. No. Business deals are a creative process that you must like participate in as an equal to the other person, regardless of your initial relationship that you had with each other. So, so pulling that out of myself kind of that took a little bit. But so the business stuff sort of ended in with its logical conclusion and walking away from that project. And then suddenly I was in this space of like, oh shit, what the heck am I going to do with my life? And also like COVID was happening during that time. So it was like lockdown. You're in a room that has stacks of books. And
yes, the involuntary monastery, as I called lockdown at the time, the involuntary monastery. We're all taking a trip.
Yeah, exactly. And so just trying to reconnect, I guess, with my sense of interest during that time, getting out of my own way of like the books that I believed that I had to read that were good. And like that this is like, if you're a good person, this is the book that you'll read. If you're a smart person, this is the book that you're going to read. And instead just kind of being like, okay, I'm going to walk into a book, I'm going to see. And then I also had like another belief in my head that like, I didn't finish books because, just like wasn't a good person or wasn't smart enough, or because I hadn't read books long enough, because I wasn't a reader when I was younger. I read some fiction, but I was very much a person who like did sports. So yeah, getting out of my own way in terms of that. And then once like all those things started to peel away, it was just like, okay, what are the things that are like, and once I had like started to like had a few sleeps, which is like the natural cycle of like allowing past goals and people and relationships to sort of die so that you can regenerate yourself and like come at things with a fresh perspective. Eventually between that and also between just spending time with my husband's family, who is immensely loving, like they are loving, and in a way that's like, you don't have to do anything to be loved. You're just loved. Like it's a crazy environment to be in. That the combination of those things then suddenly like gave me a space where it was like, okay, what are the things that are making me laugh? Or the things that are, that I'm just like, wait a second, what is that? Oh, come on. I want to know more about that. And then this is kind of when I was having conversations with you, and you were talking about like your D&D stuff and the stories of the players and their narratives that they were going on and the adventures that they were going on. And you were showing me all the different items that you had like purchased and stuff like that, and like these different artifacts. And it was just like, okay, this stuff is like, this is just cool. And it didn't really make sense to me at that time how I was going to like use it. And also I was like really new in the space. So I felt like I would have to do like a ton of reading in order to be able to start using it. But yeah, that was like my first experience of Spark I guess, that I had. And it required getting out of my own way in terms of like all these old sort of beliefs to just get in touch with that sense of play. And then eventually starting to incorporate those things that were really special to me that didn't really make sense at the time and that were bizarro and weird, and incorporating those into ideas that I was proposing as projects to solve the problems of the organizations that I started to work with after that. And just like, even though they don't really have good reason, if you look at them close enough, it's like, well, why should you be using a secret society? Why should you? Because it's fun.
It's
like
cool.
Why? Yeah, like why create a secret society? Because that's fun. Like, because like just imagine. Or like why like tradable cards that are like kind of got like a little bit of like a tarot influence and like a little bit of like that stuff. Like why would you do that? Well, I don't know, because it's just
because it's cool. Yeah, because it's fun and interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. So anyway, that's so yeah, just like not looking too hard at that stuff, and just kind of continually assembling it and proposing it as new ideas. And I mean, like I think that that's the best launch point of this story. I'll like kind of cut it off there, and then we might like loop back in and then take it further.
I'll fill. So since then, I will just say, and obviously some we'll explore. We have already talked about some of it, but we'll explore more. You've just been swinging for the fences. You took it right up immediately. So as an example, did we talk about the Society of Dust?
We never talked about the Society of Dust.
We did the Society of Dust. Where's my hood? Anyway, the Society of Dust. So that was like your first iteration of this, and it was essentially like a large scale interactive community driven alternate reality game for local youth, where youth included people in the early 20s, which had an exploratory kind of puzzly quality and this overarching storyline, but also like you immediately started doing like public performance art pieces and floating stuff down rivers and nailing weird objects all over town. Like you turned the key, and all of a sudden, it was like the next time I talked to you, were like, yeah, I'm covering this town in a dust cult, and I was like, what? It's like, no, the town council is paying for it. So you really like you jumped into it, and I'll add, there's a couple of things in here. So one is, I think you're downplaying a little bit your own connection to, I mean, I get it, your connection to sort of the imaginal was a bit, or the imaginer was a bit disrupted, but you have like a healthy streak of taste for the fantastic. You like it. And you like it in your fiction, and you like it in your, right? And it seemed like that was kind of bubbling along. And I can remember talking early on, well before COVID, like we had a whole series of like lunches and coffees and stuff, right? And I don't think we have ever successfully finished a conversation, which is to say that we have managed to finish out some loops, but we've always ended up with 10 times as many threads at the end as at the beginning, which I typically mark as an excellent quality in an interlocutor and a friend. So, but during that period, I remember talking about a lot of this stuff because I kind of can't help myself, and it threads its way through story and storytelling and role-playing, and the mechanics of that, and fantasy and archetype is both, my primary form of recreation, my primary form of artistic expression. It has therapeutic impact. It plays into research. It connects to my teaching. It threads through everything. And vocationally, I have sometimes said that properly, if we're going by some nonsense 10,000 hours rule, if I have an actual vocation, it's probably as a storyteller. I've spent more time playing role-playing games and running them and writing them than virtually any other activity, including teaching, therapy, you name it. Right? It's been the thing that has absorbed the most in my life. And when we were talking about this early on, you were really into it, but there was this, I could almost see you had a funny kind of like tension that was somehow existing between that and this other thing, which was really interesting and potential latent, right? But also seemed like it was, I don't know. It was almost like I could see you going like, these two things are incompatible.
Yeah.
Put them together and I can't, right? That's what it felt like for quite a while before COVID, I would say. And then at some point I remember, and maybe this was towards the start of COVID, you suddenly just like, I don't know what, you like fessed up to your love affair with the fantastic.
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, it was totally like that. It was, I think it came with like a confession of like what my my large collection of books on fairies that I generated when I was young. Like while I was a very serious basketball player who was determined to like play professional basketball, I was also like meanwhile had this like stash of books on fairies and all the different like, mythology around fairies.
These thick ones from the 70s. There's like fairies, giants, and gnomes. You have
those,
that type of stuff. Those are so good. I can't remember who did those, but I've got those. My mom actually.
Yeah, like Brian Froud. There's like a lot of his stuff. Yeah, Froud. Yeah.
Right. Do you have the squashed fairy book?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Me too. Yeah, that's great. It's so funny. Anyway.
Yeah, and just like the mythology surrounding fairies and and like books on like fantasy books with like unicorns or people entering into alternate worlds. And
you love portal fantasy.
I love, things where there's like a world beneath the world. Like Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, who anything by Neil Gaiman, I'm just like, yes, all of it. So anyway, I confessed to this basically, and that kind of confession sort of opened up this door that hasn't closed since, and I'm really happy about that. Let's see. So I guess, do you want to talk about then like what is Spark and what's its purpose?
Yeah.
Okay,
take a stab.
Okay, so I think that like I mean, in terms of like biblical terms, I see it as, when they talk about like the Holy Spirit and things like that, that thing that's like flowing through and that kind of connects us in this sort of artwork or God's piece of art that helps us find our place in the world. That I think that it's a wrong interpretation or an overly narrow interpretation to think of Spark as just purely the thing that you're going to follow to find the career that you're supposed to be in, or what you're supposed to be doing. There's also adventures that you go on that help you to find the people that you're supposed to surround yourself with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that like some people are good or some are bad or any of that stuff. It's just like that there is a role that you have to play, and that's continually changing and will evolve throughout your life, that requires a team around you, and that you're also a teammate to those to other people and like mentors and friends and family and all that. And so following Spark helps you to find your place, I think, in the world at any given time. Yeah,
I like that.
What about for you? What do you think?
How do I think about Spark? So when I think about Spark, I often think about Spark plugs. Okay. and not specifically because of engines, although I have been spending a lot of time thinking about engines. This is where I'm supposed to interpolate the recording of taps while I put up sad pictures of my motorcycle, which was sadly stolen like a month ago. But anyway, I think of spark plugs.
Yeah.
And the reason I think of spark plugs is that quite often, when I'm doing my own writing, teaching, but also when I'm attempting to explore creative space, right, in a certain way. Well, it actually links into the metaphor and analogy thing we were talking about, right? A metaphor is kind of juxtaposition, right? It's a juxtaposition of two things which reveal, right? You sort of apply, right? The properties of the one to the other in this contextually relevant way, right? So, when you get two things kind of close together, they have this spark quality just in the juxtaposition. You try to sort the meaning between them. And that's something that is usefully employed, obviously, in art forms of all kind, right? So, comic books, if you've ever read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, and if you haven't, I recommend it. He talks about the kind of the juxtaposition, where you can get juxtaposition of images on a page, or you can get the juxtaposition of certain kinds of text and certain kinds of images that don't necessarily align. like having a voiceover, right? Or, a slow motion shoot 'em out scene at the end of a gangster movie with, beautiful opera arias over top. Right. Or, like a jaunty Frank Sinatra tune is somebody stabbing somebody, this kind of thing. The end of, what is it? The ear dancing scene, Stuck in the Middle with You. And what is that? Reservoir Dogs.
There you go.
Quentin Tarantino, right?
Yeah.
Right. There's a juxtaposition there that creates, a thing. And so much creativity is about that kind of conjunction, not solely, but a lot of it is about this kind of synthetic conjunction. So when I'm talking to people, when I'm trying to sort of get a point across, I very often don't prefabricate it. Like, I don't hand it over. I juxtapose two streams that I feel are more, and I get them close enough without drawing an explicit link that they snap it together. And that's just much more effective. In fact, it's an old propaganda technique, but more about that later, right? You don't have to say it. You just juxtapose them and people snap their own meaning out. It's like a spark plug. If you get them close enough, it comes from inside. So it's much more compelling and convincing and animated than anything you can tell to somebody. If you give somebody a synthetic fact and you pass it over, it bounces off a lot of the time, their various defenses and But if you just give them two things and they connect them, it happens on the inside and it has this quality. Now, obviously, there are, there would be a sorceress angle to this, which is to say that, of course, it's possible if you really know what you're doing to make people have ideas, which go in certain ways. But I think of this spark, and when I think about it that way, that synthetic kind of thing, right? This, like, it's crossing the gap and there's a flash, something that starts, and this starts off a larger process, right? Like in an engine, it starts combustion, it starts rolling, but no spark, no movement, no the circularity and the linearity, the mechanical forces, no movement, no control, no nothing. It all starts with this. And when I think about, in the way that you're talking about it, these sparks, there's whatever metaphysical stance you want to take on something like synchronicity. Okay. And it's a thorny question, but the idea of, the sort of preponderance of meaningful coincidences. It is certainly the case that when people are having that experience, regardless of whether the metaphysics, that's a valid experience in the world or it's a secret communication, what it feels like is this sense of spark and connection in its most direct kind of form, right? One of the reasons Jung was interested in it was that it seems to send a spark across the mind-body gap, right? Because it's like the world and my mind are somehow connected in some deep way. Here's a little spark. Universe winks at you. And when this stuff starts to pile up, right, you get this, like, even if you are running your sort of probabilistic, statistical, skeptical machinery at full tilt, right, you'll often get this, like, string of improbable significances that seem to stretch out. And the tendency a lot of the time with synchronicity, of course, is to treat it like a riddle. You got to unravel it and da-da-da-da-da. But a lot of the time it's accompanied just with this feeling of being in alignment, in the channel, in flow, right? And in flow, like in a kind of like a broad existential sense. And I think that's partly, when you say it's not just about kind of career, a job, right? How you make your money, it's about vocation, right? This bigger set of things, how you are situated in the world, what your efforts mean, how your past and your future are different, but nevertheless connected, how proceeds into the future. Like, you get this kind of alignment of your parts, your goals, time, space, meaning, purpose,
the center point of all those, and where it, like, connects.
And so, I think about that sometimes. Obviously, if you play around with creative juxtapositions, you can kick this kind of thing off. And the spark itself, it seems to me, or at least the thing that I always personally track, is the sense of interest and potential that comes when the spark happens. When these two things connect, what is it? And what I'm talking about, of course, is an insight, right?
Yeah.
But an insight can be a pretty broad thing. It can be sort of wholly propositional in some way, right? And just be like, oh, like this is a this, right? Like a categorization thing, or this is a
Yeah.
subtype of this, or these two things are the same, that kind of stuff. But it can also have this much bigger penumbra of sort of, like intuitive material around it, stuff that is very difficult to rationally express in any way, that sort of shades off into the mythological or the archetypal, or right, these levels of implicit knowing that go so far outside what we can consciously handle, right? That you can just sort of like pick up the field around it. Does that make sense? I sound like such a mystic.
No, it totally does. And it like when you,
it's not a secret though, I am a mystic anyway. But
when you sent over the question a few days ago about story, about the purpose of story and that, and then in relation to Sandman, but just this, and then this kind of relates again to like the book that I was reading, of the idea of like imaginative writing, that it picks up on the social context. And it like kind of brings that forward to your attention. And for humans, like walking around for ourselves, like the social context is kind of like, you can think of it as the stuff that we haven't taken into consideration, that we're not holding in our ego, or that we're not identifying with, or we're not projecting necessarily in our immediate goal, or the stuff that we understand. It's like all this other stuff that we've kind of left out, the instincts that we've left out. So that when they kind of things start
shadow.
Like things start sticking to your attention in like in a synchronistic way, that has this sort of like mystical component. It's like a thematic sort of like force, a god that's like coming forward, or that's like an instinct that you've left out that's needed in some way, and it starts to attach to like pictures and like like to scenes that you're watching, like in a movie, that like suddenly are like that grip your attention for some reason that you don't understand, and then for the rest of the week it's like playing over and over, and then suddenly it's like you're seeing patterns in the world that map onto that movie scene that you were just watching.
Totally. It's, if you're paying attention, and this is the sort of pay attention, develop some modicum of mindfulness bit, right? But I think you're really hitting on something, and that's when you start to watch it, if you sort of step back far enough and can kind of pay attention without getting too tangled or too whatever, it seems very much like you're watching a self-organizing structure, right? Like it sort of pulls things in, often without a good explanation. You're like, why this? I don't know, but clearly this also has the interest, has the glow, like it's fascinating. It has a fascination. And so as more of this stuff pulls in, it's like, that thing that you'd never heard of last week, you now see 15 times in a row, often in some like really egregious way, like a random person mentions it, on the subway, or this kind of thing, right? So you get this like synchronistic scattering of stuff that's like, what the? But you can also see it kind of, I don't know, like, it's like watching it form a structure that you can't quite see, a transparent crystal in a fluid or something. Anyway,
no, that's exactly it. And sometimes it's not even like in the positive sense, or like in that kind of interest sense, is like I've had it come forward sometimes as being like this sense of responsibility, like I have like that I must do, like this thing needs to be done, like you shouldn't do the thing that you want to do right now, but you like following through with this sense of like responsibility that you have to this friend, that you must follow through with this, and then you play that out. And it's like this own little like adventure loop, and then you learn a lesson at the end of it, which was like something that you needed to know about yourself, or that had changed, or something like that. So sometimes it comes as like this sense of responsibility. Sometimes it's you'll get like this idea in your head that will be like, oh, this is a way that I could connect with that person. And then it's like, you get that immediate anxiety that then flows in because you haven't connected with them in a while, but it's like, but I really should connect with them. And that's like sometimes also a call. I just wanted to backtrack though. I was just thinking about what you were saying about spark as being this way of sort of like connecting to ideas, or to parts that like, not just in terms of like you presenting those things, but then as a person pulling forward their own internal narrative, or like structuring their experiences in a way that then sort of comes out as like a purpose or an idea. And then they propose that out into the world, or an ambition or a dream, and they propose it out into the world. And then they see like if it sticks, if it captures somebody else, or like a way of connecting. And then if it doesn't work, they'll be like, oh, and then they might like try, it's either like maybe they're in the wrong spot, or then they'll try and like reorder their experiences in a way, so that then like you come forward with like, well, maybe this is the purpose. And it's like, and it's
yeah, where does this go? What do I do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, although also, or at least I found, things are stickier than I expected. And what I mean by that is like, like I'm a weirdo. So I would contend that like everybody's a weirdo, right? In the same way that I say everybody is crazy, everybody's a weirdo. You get to know people, and it's like there are always these, these strange little frills. No matter how button down and bolt down they're trying to be, or how there's always some weird stuff, and which is great. I think it's wonderful. But I grew up saying I was a weirdo. And sort of within a house that celebrated weirdness, and coming really out of the 1970s and a celebration of sort of high weirdness, post-hippie high weirdness, science fiction, Cheech and Chong, the Muppets, right? Like this is very much the space that, that I formed in. And I was lucky enough to have a family that was very supportive of my individuality, my idiosyncrasies, my interests. So, I was just in what I was into, and I didn't take, it's like you can be into it or not be into it. What took me a lot longer to get around to was the realization that, I was a weirdo and I was interested in weird things, but basically that anything that I was interested in, there was a very good chance that other people were interested in it too. And that was not something that I started with. In fact, I basically took it for granted that like nobody gives a shit about the weird, whatever weird thing I'm into, because I did have that experience, certainly during formative years, over and over again, right? When you say, hey, did you know that in the 1950s, expedition was formed by an American oil man to steal a mummified Yeti hand from the Himalayas? And then the girl you like says, you're weird, don't talk to me, right? These are the social pressures of like middle school, whatever. So I sort of had internalized the idea that's like, okay, like, whatever, I'm into weird stuff, that's fine. But in fact, what I realized over time was like, nothing is for everybody, right? Yeah. But actually, huge numbers of people are interested in weird things. Ergo, if I find something interesting, there's a very good chance other people will find it interesting. Ergo, the key to doing stuff is to really hone the sense of what I find interesting.
Yeah.
Like, and that sounds very simple in a way, but like, it's something I do with my students a lot, right? And it's like, propose a paper about what? I don't know, what you find interesting. And that's a much harder thing for people to access, right? It's like locate what you think is interesting and why it's interesting, or paying attention to, oh, I find this interesting, and then asking, right? It's hard enough for people to get access to their preferences, but it's a whole other level for them to get access to, like, why do I find this interesting? Like I like to challenge my students, do you have a film that you've watched like 10 times? You have a film that you watch a lot? Okay. Yeah, watch it again, except now, while you're watching it, take notes on your emotional state and wait to see if there's any particular scene that always produces like a high or a low or a particular kind of feeling, and ask yourself, what is it about this? Why are you watching it over and over again?
Yeah.
What is it, right? Like same thing, kids ask for the same book over and over again. Why?
Yeah. And you may not understand it at first either, but like once you kind of have that question in your mind, things start to pop out. Like you start to get an answer to that question, like as you enter. So so there's two things I guess that I wanted to just add into that, or like for us to explore about that idea. One of them is the idea that, there's two pieces to this. One of them is the idea that I do notice that like, if I spend time in a space, I can find things interesting. So there's like, along with that comes this fear of like, okay, but then I can just be embedded in any space and find things interesting. And then it's like, there's this line, which is like energy flows where attention goes. So as long as you're like putting attention in a space, you're going to become a machine to solve problems in that space, or like to, so, there's that kind of angle to it. But
right, because it's good to care about the things that you're involved in, but you don't want to, it's like a hill climbing strategy. You don't want your interest to get stuck on something that, quote, doesn't matter, unquote.
Yeah, or is not, sometimes your interest gets, well, I know for a personal experience, and I've heard this experience of women, right? Just because, but that just happens because I've been talking with a few of them, and about getting stuck on the qualities of a certain man, so my first relationship or first couple relationships.
Oh, like romantically speaking.
Romantically speaking, yeah, of what a good person is, or what the type of person who's right for you is. And I think that, yeah, just from when you identify.
I assure you, this is not limited to women.
Yeah, I had a sense that it wasn't. I just know because I'm in a body of a woman that's right. But yeah, you just, it's the same thing with careers, but with people that you, part of the process is that you identify with the person, you fall in love with it, or with them, or with the career or whatever it is that you are spending time in, which is part of engaging that interest or finding the way that you're relevant there. There was a moment of a spark where you thought that you were relevant to each other in some way, but then that it can cloud your vision, or you'll attach to certain features that even though it's dying, and this is something I haven't quite figured out yet, but even though it's dying, or it's no longer, it's not actually the spot that you're supposed to be in, it becomes difficult for you to remove yourself, and it requires you pulling out different sort of complexes within your brain in order to reorient yourself, I guess, or that's overly abstract. Haha.
So I'm going to I'll come at it with another abstraction and see if when you're in a relationship with somebody, I mean, okay, so for my first caveat, of course, is that we have a perennial conflation within our culture between the duration of a relationship and the significance of a relationship. Right. And probably there is some correlation between those things, obviously, right? Like a 50-year-long relationship is bound to have some significance, but it certainly is the case that a relationship could be comparatively brief, but highly impactful and transformative, or relatively long, but sort of, a little bit of a calm riverboat cruise, not a lot of transformation of character, or, you know what I mean? So,
yeah, totally.
So, okay. So there is that kind of conflation that happens. And because there is this conflation, there's a third conflation between duration, significance, and goodness, which is also a conflation. A relationship is not necessarily good because it's long, and is not necessarily good because it's significant.
Yeah.
Right? Goodness
totally.
is this independent dimension, but we tend to conflate the three together. And so we tend to think of relationships as being long, therefore significant, therefore good.
Yeah, or if it was emotionally engaging, that it's good.
Yes.
Because that's how it
right.
Yeah.
Emotionally engaging. That's a good way to put it. Yes, that's how you get caught in the I know I've been guilty of this, caught in the romantic relationship that is nothing but Sturm und Drang, right? All the time. Oh my God. One of the best things, honestly, about reaching middle age is the decision. I am no longer, I think, highly interested in having Wagnerian drama in my day-to-day emotional life. I think it's just fine. I did that. I am struck. Anyway, but the thing I was getting at was this. There's a kind of familiarity and a build of expectation that happens over the long term. We sink roots into each other when we're in relationship. And the fact is that we have a tendency to enshrine, both within our own behaviors, but also our sort of shared behavior within relationship. We have a tendency to enshrine certain things as being load-bearing habits. We associate with them in a way that is not, in fact, central to our identity per se, but feels like it is, because it's one of the pillars that sort of holds up the universe in which we're living in that relationship, right? And so sometimes we mistake some of those habitual things for essential features of us as beings.
Can you give an example?
Sure. He said confidently. until he thought about it.
I know I'm putting you on the spot. Can you list something from the book?
Well, okay. So let me give an example. Okay, well, so let's talk about the individual example first. Okay, so people, for instance. Okay, well, we could talk about university.
Yeah,
that's a good example. People come through school and they know nothing but school, kindergarten, grade school, middle school, high school. And then they're told definitively, it's like, you have to go to university. Their parents tell them they have to go. The school tells them they have to go because it's the done thing. Why is it the done thing? Well, it's the done thing because the GI Bill after the end of World War II made free tuition available to everybody. Prior to that, a relatively small proportion of the population went to university. Having an undergraduate degree, right? Having a degree meant that you were a highly selected and highly educated person. It was a fast track to management. Therefore, it was, it was highly correlated to success. And so if that was the way forward, right, and people couldn't afford to do it and so on, suddenly you got a whole generation of people who can afford to do it. More of them do it. They internalize that value, then they pass that value down to their children, who pass it down to their children. And so all of a sudden you got, I don't know, 80% of the population or something doing a thing that used to be a somewhat highly specialized setting for specialized knowledge production, which means that it bows to the secondary master of the financial and starts to absorb sort of the mandate of what in Canada we would call colleges, and in the States they would call, I don't know, like community colleges or trade schools or something, right? It gets overtaken. So everybody does this. Like so many people do it because it is the way. Now, never mind, of course, having a degree is to some extent correlated to long-term income and all that jazz. But frankly, not as much as it used to be. Like, you only have to look at the numbers in the economy to realize, right, that what's an undergraduate degree worth exactly? Like, what does it get you?
Yeah, I know. That's,
It gets you an interview at the call center, basically, is what it gets. Not that that's somebody's, well, to be honest, I sort of wish call centers didn't. Anyway, but
they don't realize that when you come out of the undergrad, like, or out of having a degree, you still have to do all the stuff that you would have had to have done before, which was like the social networking and like
right. And all that stuff. You still have to figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to, right? Your job doesn't have to be the central pivot of reality either, right? Despite what our sort of post-Calvinist hangover in North America keeps telling us. But, the idea that like there's still stuff to do. But if you get people halfway through university and you're like, well, maybe university isn't for you, or maybe it isn't for you right now, or maybe there's 1,000 other paths up the mountain, 1,000,000 other paths up the mountain. There's so many potential possible things you could do that aren't this, that are perfectly viable, but people can't see it, and it's terrible. Right? They're terrified because this is the done thing, because they've been told it's the done thing, and because it's all they know. Right? Lots of people I know who went to grad school did it because it's like, what I know is school. Non-school is terrifying. I know school. More school, please. But not necessarily into anything they liked and whatever. So that would be an example of like a pillar, a habit, right? That becomes a load-bearing habit. You believe that it's holding up your being, but what it is actually holding up is just sort of, I don't know, your local universe, which may or not may be satisfying for you, right?
The
same thing, I think. Oh, sorry. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, I just to put this in terms like as well that I also understand. It's like you projected forward a hypothetical future, like a goal or whatever it was, a dream of like what the ideal state would be. And that had details attached to it. And then you invested in those, or you identified with them, and you started on the path forwards. And then you realize, or you don't realize, but what comes to exist is that pieces of yourself don't map on to that thing. But then you've already, because of time invested and the idea of this idea of like hell being that which is connected to like time, and like this, that the past inevitably becomes the future, whereas that heaven is more like a state of like present where you've kind of eliminated all those things and you can just see what is. You're so tied to that past vision and the details of it that you're unable to see that a large like piece of you actually doesn't map onto it anymore.
Right. That it is. And often, right, it's hand-me-down. It's an unexamined assumption that you got from a mentor, a teacher, a parent, your culture, whatever.
Or rebelling against them.
Or rebelling against, pulling the opposite and then going in too hard there and not letting transition happen. Or it's something you formulated at a certain age that may have been doing a good job then, but then you never questioned it again. So you have these unquestioned structural assumptions that constrain the space in certain ways. And the thing is, like, of course, everybody is in the position, when they're young, more or less, or virtually everybody, of constructing their sense of the world and themselves and whatever out of hand-me-downs, right? They get somebody else's clothes that don't fit that well. And at some point you start kind of chafing against it and being like, weird, like this shirt that I got passed down from my dad doesn't quite fit, or this shirt that my teacher gave me doesn't, right? You have to start questioning some of these assumptions, but it's terrifying to do so.
Yeah.
Right. It's because you're still associated, and it's like, but if I pull these out, I'll be destroyed. It's like, no, you won't. You will just turn into something else, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So you can do the same thing within romantic relationship is what I'm getting at. And sometimes that's like, when you get stuck on a type, and people do have types, you're hitting a certain assumption, usually derived from previous family life, but you're hitting a type over and over again. Or, it's an unquestioned assumption about what sort of relationship the relationship is, and therefore where your values stand relative to it. Or you have picked up a useful and admirable value from your partner, right? But then it becomes a fixed pillar. I guess this is my song and dance routine. Don't be inflexible. Like,
yeah.
Anyway,
you're, again, this idea of assembling a toolbox. And I think that this is something I was just thinking about this morning, was that I think maybe we briefly touched on this, that idea that like you think that you play when you're young and then play is done and then you move on. And then after that, it's just like you've got a bunch of responsibilities. And what we forget is that we enter into different spaces and we're constantly like, you play around in them and certain things will attach to you, and then you bring those forward, and then you go and you play around in a different space, and then things will attach, and you sort of assemble those with the past things that attached, and then you move on. And it's not just your career that you're doing this with, which, like, a career, you are trying on rules. It's not taking up like the first opportunity and then like that's the only thing you're ever going to get. It's being able to take those risks early so that you get a sense that good things come afterwards. But that also relationships are the same thing. And it's like, it's work, it's persistence, it's trying on different like people and things like that to get a sense of, maybe you're,
I'm going to challenge this and say it's not work.
Here we go. Dissensus. There's a side of it that is not work. It's adventure at the same time. The clashing fists appear on the screen.
What I mean is, it's effort. That's definitely true.
Effort.
It's
effort.
But the distinction I always like to make there is like, you hear this old saw, right? Like, a good marriage is hard work. What a load of shit. If your marriage has gotten to the place where it's hard work, something's gone hellishly wrong. A good marriage doesn't, of course, it requires effort and there is some work involved, of course. But a good marriage is hard to play. Play is how relationships start. You do fun shit together. You tell jokes. Okay, we have 4 seconds left on the clock. We're gonna.
That's hilarious. We're gonna. Right? This is fantastic. We'll have to do a part 2 of Spark because I want us to.
We got to keep going for 10 minutes. So it's fine. If people can handle 90 minutes, they can handle 100, right? And we're escaping Babylonian time into something a bit more metric, a bit more French and metric and modern. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It's fine.
Okay, 10 minutes is fine.
I can't imagine people
are challenging you, God, with higher power.
That's right. People aren't watching this in one sitting, are they? Well, if they're not, then they can pause it, and if they are, congratulations, it's an extra 10 minutes, then plus the theme song at the end. So
you're gonna love it.
No, not the theme song. What is it? The outro song.
The outro. I just got to listen to it, and it's so good. You guys are in for a treat. I mean, you'll have heard it already for episodes before this, but that's right. I just got to hear it.
That's right. Yes, we've recorded this, but then I've been working on the title sequence and the end sequence, so that's all going to be appended afterwards. Right. So hard play. So all that I mean is, like, of course there's effort, lots of effort, and relationships are effort, right? Being in a relationship and not understanding that there's going to be conflict, right? And that it's not about not fighting, it's about finding a productive fighting style, and that kind of thing. Yeah,
that's totally, what I was going to say was, this, you just reminded me of something, of 2 things. I would say, on the one hand, something that I found that that I wish that I had known was that this entire process of transformation of like kind of being able to separate yourself from pain, and then so that you can understand it, and then you kind of come back at it from a new angle and are able to like transform yourself. That it's, whenever I would read about like health stuff, health related things, that they would say that like, yes, and then you just wake up better, or like you do this and then you're just better, and then suddenly you've just got the energy back. And they don't tell you about the part which is like, oh yeah, but also you kind of have to rebuild your brain and your energy levels, and you have to do that by persistent, like an intentional sort of movement forward. At least I did. I mean, I think that there maybe are some people who just kind of wake up and they're better. I've heard that like concussions sort of like you're bad and then you're better. But
I can't think of too many things like that.
Yeah.
Like, and in most cases, you're right. It's like rehab redacted. I can't think of too many things. I mean, I guess, you know, if you're sick and down with a fever, the fever breaks, and the next day you wake up and
and you're better.
The Easter bells are ringing, and that's great, you know. But yeah, that seems uncommon. You know, something like an injury or a real sickness or something, you got a road.
Yeah, it's a road, and it's not just like the physical like rehabilitation or like, you know, getting a surgery and then that being better, like navigating, like all those things are roads. Like learning to navigate doctors is a road. Which other pieces of advice you're going to again try on and see which one works is a road. But then there's also this other piece, which is like your brain has formed an entire set of associations of what it can't do based on your prior state, and you're constantly having to challenge that and challenge those anxieties and challenge your, like, testing your physical capability, and you don't know whether or not you're going to hit your limit or if that limit even exists anymore. And it's just, so that's the component of it that is like a persistent sort of work, I would say, that like on the path of like a transformation. But when it comes to any of this stuff for like relationships or other types of things, that it's not like when people talk about a sense of adventure, that once you enter on this road and you find your spark, that, you know, like that, then you're welcome to like a life of adventure. And then when you picture adventure, you're like, well, that means that I'm in a career that allows me to travel everywhere all over the world, and that I'm meeting famous people, and like the really, so then you kind of set this benchmark for yourself that, oh crap, I'm not going to feel great until like I've read all these books so that I can speak at this level with this great person and achieve fame. Like it's like a thing that you'll kind of set for yourself when you think of it in that way. But the fun part about it is that when you start being able to identify these sparks, that like you realize that it's an emotional journey that you go on every single time, so that when you start having those tough conversations with your partner and learning to, you know, stick your ground with a certain idea, and it's like telling the truth, but it's telling the truth not in the way that this is going to be a fight and then it's going to, like, you know, we're just going to have a difference of opinion and I need you to come to understand me. It's that it's coming to an understanding, and that there's like this cool like reconciliation point at the end if you're in a loving two-way loving relationship. And that engaging in those encounters and kind of looking for those little lines of adventure that you can cross in your everyday life, it makes your life like feel so adventurous, like you are traveling to a different country every single day and getting to see, like a new world every single day. That's just like, that's been my own kind of experience of it.
This reminds me, see, I can't remember what we've talked so much, and I can't remember what we've recorded. But anyway, so one of the things this reminds me is, you know, there's the saw about, you know, people often quote Joseph Campbell on this. You have to find out the myth that you're living. And one thing is, of course, everybody then decides that they're living the hero's journey, which is fine, but it's a very high level myth in a certain sense, right? People don't necessarily shift their myths around, but part of it is like, you have to figure out what myth you're living. Doesn't mean you have to jam your existing life into the myth you want. It means you have to find out what the mythological expression of the present moment is. And there may be more than one, and there's a bunch of different myths. You have to find out what myth you are living. Not you have to aspirationally construct yourself all 22 steps of the hero's journey, right? That stuff is useful to know, obviously, but like, it's about getting a sense of the actual present moment and this sort of layer of significance that goes with it. And when you tap into that, of course, I mean, well, I'll just shorthand it. Like, what's reality made of exactly? Particles. What are the particles made of? I don't know, waves, I guess. What are the waves made of? Potentials. What are those made of? Magic.
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 Yeah,
Now,
totally.
Again, I'm I'm highly metaphysically distanced and agnostic. I'm not making any specific philosophical commitment here. But the universe is made of magic, and our experience of it is also made of magic. And so, and you can take that as metaphorically as you like. But the point is that I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in the longer run, and things we've already talked about, are, people don't like using that word because it sounds flaky and weird. But the point is that what we're talking about is tapping into the magic.
Yeah. It's how to tap into the magic of the world.
How to tap into the magic. And if you're tapping into the magic, you probably are, marching to your own drummer a little bit, right? As you pointed out yesterday, what was the question? Would you rather be a spy? Or what was it?
Was it a spy or a wizard or something like that? I think it was.
That's a false dichotomy. But anyway, this is like, would you rather be a ninja or a pirate? I'd rather be a Viking. So what was a spy or a?
I think it was something like
learn magic. I think
learn magic, something like that, or like something like that.
So anyway,
to do with magic.
The core notion being that spies are representatives of sort of order. Magic stands in for a little bit of shake up, a little chaotic, right? So this idea of shaking things up, finding your own path, accessing your sort of individuality in the creative sense, following your own interest, right? Follow your bliss, right? This isn't just like do what makes you feel good. It's not follow your physical euphoria.
No, it's not. It's it's a purpose-driven play, which is like what I've had to come back around to understanding, where it's like, it's not goal setting, because that's like if it's just that, you can't get it. But it's like this like playful sort of spirit that is underneath this like a greater purpose. And that like, as you're kind of going through these cycles of transformation, that you're allowing yourself like room for play, for revelation, for imagination. And then you take a step back from those and you start to, then you'll come up with like a purpose, or rewriting your narrative a little bit, attempting in a way. And then you kind of circle back around with another revelation or a bit of play. And then eventually when you take a step back, and I really want you to tell your story of kind of how you came to like what you're doing, because you have this beautiful imagery that you gave, where you took what type of painting was it that you called it? One of those like splatter paintings.
Like an abstract, like a Rothko or a
Plotnik.
Pointillism.
Was it pointillism?
Yeah,
no.
pointillist paintings. Yeah.
What was it?
I think, or impressionist.
No, but it was like a specific name of an artist that you used when you were talking about how you came to therapy.
Oh my God.
For your cover letter that you wrote, or your
I know what you mean. I think I just said pointillist.
Maybe you did.
Yeah, I think I just said it was a pointillist painting.
Yeah.
I forget. I said something, whatever. I was just sort of goofing around with this application letter, but I said something like, my career has been less checkered than painted in polka dots. But when I stepped back from the seemingly random pointillist, I began to see that there was a shape emerging, something of this kind.
Yeah, exactly. It was something like that. So, it's like a purpose-driven play in a way that kind of combines the two, and that's I want us to walk through that process, because there's a lot of pieces to it that you can't just like, when we talk about it at the level that we're talking about it, then it's not really, I don't think it's as helpful for people.
Right.
Like, we're kind of giving you like a sense of like, okay, this is where they're going, but it doesn't help you sort of walk around in your life and see the spark in that.
I see. I totally know what you mean. Grounding it out in the specific. Okay, I'm gonna have to tell that story next time, but actually next time I want to lead with something, because you got me thinking about the rehabilitative, the aspirational, the physical, the expression, right? The pushing yourself hard and not accepting your existing limits. Mm-hmm. And then of course I was thinking about the dark side of that, which both of us are familiar with. Yeah. And this suddenly reminded me that I think the first time we went for coffee on DuPont or something a number of years ago, your leg was in a cast.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
you had a basketball injury, right?
Yeah. And Achilles, I ruptured my Achilles
Yeah,
playing
because
basketball.
you were all like you went like Black Mamba on the court, right? You were
Yeah.
hammering the right.
It's a quick change of direction and it's a
yeah. Yeah. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Anyway, so I want to talk about that, but there
yeah.
is one last bit which I thought of right at the outset when you were talking about Neil Gaiman, and I think it's relevant here, and I think it'll probably feed in next time, which is this. And this insight the other day, I think, so I'm pitching it here. I had this insight the other day that, you mentioned, the becoming a writer, the getting up every day, right? The Stephen King routine. And Stephen King, for those who don't know, I know we've talked about him before, but if you've ever read, you should read the book On Writing. It's excellent.
Yeah.
Not just as a book on writing, it's just a really excellent book about him and his life and substance abuse and so on, motivation.
It's a transformational book for sure.
It's terrific. It's a great book.
Yeah.
I have, I think, a couple copies, but I read that when I was working as a professional writer, and at the time it was quite daunting, right? Because that guy is a machine, right? He gets up every day, writes and he writes and he writes. Anyway, so I was thinking about this, and part of what informs that, right, is this idea about a certain kind of professionalism, right? It's about professionalism. It's like, if you want to play with the big dogs, right, you've got to have this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fair enough, right? Mastery takes time and effort and humility and time, so much more time than you think to get really good at things.
Oh yeah, it's really true.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's fine. But you when we look at it that way in terms of the professionals, I mean, like, if you're going to be good, if you're going to play with the big dogs, you need to focus, right? This is the kind of specialization that's occurred in the complexity of our culture. And it got me thinking about how storytelling has been professionalized, right?
Yeah.
So, for most cultures and most of human history, one of our major pastimes as human beings is like sitting around a fire telling stories, often with an oral tradition.
Yeah.
Right. But that aspect, that kind of, spontaneous storytelling, or storytelling generally, has been segregated. It's been professionalized. And so lots of people won't interact with that creative process. They won't do storytelling, right? They won't undertake storytelling because like sitting around a fire telling stories is not a thing we do a lot, right? So there's no access to the space, and people are like, I can't write a story. It's like, why not? You're made of them.
Yeah, I know. And you're telling them every day when you're like talking to people. Like
that's right.
What
your whole day is stories, and then you get home and you talk about work, you talk about stories, you describe yourself to somebody, your stories, you're made of stories, the stories people tell, the stories you tell, the differences in those stories. Then you get some downtime, so you kick back with a cold one and some stories. Like, that's we love, right? And upsides and downsides to the narrative, don't get me wrong. But that professionalization and specialization has moved people away from just engaging story and narrative in that way, and so it's consumptive primarily. A professional class passes it in, but people don't have the same degree of facility and confidence in re-engaging that stuff, and so they're stuck in super brass tack storytelling. Right. So I was thinking about that a bit, and thinking about how that kind of feeds into this, and why there's I think more of a gap there than there actually used to be. And this, of course, plugs into my whole thing where I get super pissy about side hustles, right? Like, it's not that I think people shouldn't have them, but the idea
I didn't know this. That's hilarious.
Well, I mean, and I've been guilty of it too. Like, I've done a little bit of professional DMing, but one of my hard-won lessons is that not everything should be subsumed to the authority of the commercial. Not everything needs to be about expending resources and acquiring resources. And that's the very essence of play. The essence of play is that it's not, it is a thing done for its own sake, for the pleasure of itself, whether it's a game or whatever it is. The essence of play is that it is a thing done for its own sake.
Yeah, it's so true. And you need that proper balance where like parts of your life are like, you leave room for this space where you can play. And then you're like, that will lead you to like be, work underneath different mentors, to try out different organizations and things. And you have then a whole bunch of different parts that are dissociated. And then you engage in this bit of like trying to find a way to wind them together, with a recognition that not all of them are going to wind together at that time. And that there's some things that you might need to discard because you just can't have that many priorities. But then there's also some things that are that you just don't understand yet that are important that you'll
Yeah.
pull out later. Like
Weirdly
Anderson,
fit back in.
yeah. Like you pulled, so this is great. Like the music that's the end credits for this was made 10 years ago, 10 years ago, where he was just like playing around. And now it's been pulled out and is the end credits, and it's, come on, it's perfect. I'm authoritatively saying that it's perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, I was monkeying. I had some client cancellations, and so I went to a Starbucks, and I had gotten a new iPad for the first time, and I was kicking around, and so it had programs, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll spend some time dicking around with music software. And then I did, and I made this. I do make some music. I have no professional musical training. And like most of the art that I do, I am an amateur.
Yeah.
I'm an amateur. There's some things where I have real professional credentials, but by and large, the way that I like to approach things, the low-hanging fruit of the creative process is jump in and fuck around.
It's exactly,
stakes are low, and it's fine, and you don't have to be generating money with an Etsy storefront. Like if you want to do that, that's fine, but there's almost no quicker way to drain the sort of spontaneous and intrinsic joy out of a creative activity. I mean, there's science even to support this, than to suddenly chain it to filthy lucre, right?
Yeah. Well, you'll never, like, you have your like area of expertise that's kind of like that you're gradually building, that seems to be like the common thread, but then like you're constantly like engaging. Yeah, it's weird, but not really. I
don't know what my area of expertise is, but anyway.
I know. but then there's like, when you're engaging with projects and when you're living in your life, at every single step, you're going to be like, I'm an amateur at this, because you're on the edge of, your growth. For every single step, I'm an amateur, like what I was feeling when I was entering into the territory of game design.
Right.
I'm an amateur at this, but there's some group of people that you're going to be relevant to, that your amateur production, as long as you care about it, if like, that's a key, like you got to care about the people that you're targeting, and you have to care about what you're doing. And if you deeply care about it, then it's going to be something that is like valuable in some context, maybe not in what you hoped for, but
I think that's really nailing something. I don't even know where I learned this, but one of the best pieces of writing advice for fiction that I ever picked up was, if you feel it, odds are your reader will feel it. Right? In the same way as when you're super pissed off at somebody and you're trying to conceal it and you write them a text, you look at it 2 days later and you're like, oh my God, right? It bends the choices. If you feel the thing strongly, then it doesn't mean that you don't have to learn craft or take care and whatever, right? You do have to pick up a certain amount of technique. But the point is, that is the surest way to get that thing through. And the same thing goes in general for, in my experience, interest and thus enthusiasm. If you can learn to communicate your enthusiasm and the core of your enthusiasm through your creative whatever, people respond to it. They connect to it. And honestly, it doesn't even have to be for that. Our culture's weird bent, which is like, you get to high school and the teacher starts saying, you're not that good at painting. You might want to consider something else. It's like, fuck off. I'm painting. Why are you painting? You can't sell that. It's like, I wasn't planning to. Like, I'm just making paintings. What the heck? Yeah. What do you think the point of life is? Anyway, sorry. Okay. And then I flashed back to grade 9.
We're just playing out a little bit of our stuff.
Yeah, in the last 30 seconds, I wrestled my teenage demons. Yeah. Okay, we should probably wrap up because we set a timer and then promptly ignored it.
Yeah, and now we're kind of fraying into a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, okay. We've opened up a whole bunch of doors. So here's what I'm going to say next time. Next time, I want to hear about the leg. I want to talk more about the Society of Dust, right? And how this stuff has unfolded for you a little bit. I will do my level best to tell some condensed version of how I got here. I've told the story in other places, but...
you have online or...
Yeah, mostly in the career side. There's a video that I did for the course BPM 332, Buddhism and Psychotherapy. Okay. So that is in sets of 1-hour lectures, one that is sort of psychotherapeutically oriented and the other that is Buddhistically oriented. In the week which is devoted to right livelihood, one of those 2 videos, I sort of unpack the broad strokes of my idiosyncratic career track. So
Okay.
in
All
there.
right.
So that's in
Okay.
there. But to be honest, the question you're asking is bigger. So I'm going to have to figure out some kind of sensible treatment that whatever. So I'm not pouring out like 1,000 pages of boring Bildungsroman.
Oh,
But
but
instead,
almost like I kind of want you to struggle through it like I did, just like of like an unplanned, like I have a sense that this story should be told, but this is my first time telling it in this context. So I'm gonna, and then partway through be like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. And then it's
I
like,
already
no,
smashed
it's
at this
okay.
with 2 novels, neither of which quite got there, but I'll try to do it verbally. I'll try to do it verbally.
Yeah.
Part of it is, of course, I
Yeah.
don't really know where I am or how I got here or where I'm going.
I
I mean,
know.
the similarity between what I wanted and where I am seems unlikely to be random.
Mhm.
And yet it's very difficult for me to trace out any kind of like smooth, conscious causal linkage. And I suspect that there's something quite significant in there.
Yeah.
And I've speculated about it a lot. So, okay, I'll do my level best next time. Next time. Okay.
Next time.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll wrap this one up. I guess those first 3 will be going up fairly soon. We're playing this game again next week? Is that the plan?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So we will pick up the threads from there. And I swear to God, I'll watch the first few Sandmen.
Sandman.
Sandmen. The first 2 Sandmans.
The Men of Sand.
I'll watch the first 2 episodes of Sandman. The Sandman.
The Sandman. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we can touch on that too, because I think this question around narrative, story, dream,
and
magic.
The use of story to like that to either propel you into an adventure or to give you a sense of where the line is that you must cross, the skill that you must develop. Yeah, all that stuff.
All that stuff. Okay. All that good developmental blooming. And yeah, I know.
We're giving you tools to put in your tool chest.
Exactly. Tool chest. You did something between like a flower garden and I don't know, like a distant explosion. I like that. Okay. Okay. For sure YouTube is going to select those 2 frames. As though we're both possessed by Saint Vitus's dance or whatever. Okay. So thank you. This has been episode 3 of Dissensus. And please, I hope you're enjoying and following along and taking voluminous notes, or just letting it flow over you like a golden oral river, brief window sparks, if you will, in the flow. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Computer. 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 Lights at 25%. Lights at 25%. Computer. Okay, Google. Shut the fuck up. Computer. Computer. Lights at 25%. Lights at 25%. Bow down before me, meat bags.